Okay, members of council, city staff, members of the media, visitors, guests, welcome to another budget session of the General Issues Committee, Friday, February the 9th, 2018. As we continue to march on in this very difficult budget year and lots of important matters in front of us, and one of the three, I think, largest budgets that we oversee between police, community services, and public works. We're hearing the third of the three largest, I believe, that the corporation deals with. I'll call the meeting to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton, temporarily archived on our website. Other individuals' media may also be audibly and or visually recording this meeting. As well, a reminder that all those who are addicted to electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. The ones who giggled understood exactly what I meant. Approval of the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any changes?
Yes, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Added as item 3.1, the minutes of the February 1st, 2018 GIC budget meeting.
Well, with that in line, may I please have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Mayor Eisenberger, Councillor Pasuta. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. And declarations of interest. Looking around the table, I see none. At this point in time, before I approve the minutes, I understand, are there any members of council that just want to, Councillor Pasuta, that may have to get away early and may not be able to come back, so we know that we have to maintain quorum? Councillor Pasuta, did you just want to mention? Press your request there and I'll activate you. There you go, Councillor Pasuta.
After about 11:45, I have a friend and somebody I do business with on our farm that he's not doing well and he's retiring from his job, and need just pay my respects to him and have a bit of time with him.
Wonderful, Councillor. You need to be there to support him. Thank you. Stephanie, I understand Councillor Partridge's dad is under some medical issues, so she may or may not be here today.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, no, I'm not expecting her today.
Okay, got to look after her. I believe he's 95-year-old, her father, and we pray everything goes well. All right, with that in mind, approval of the minutes of February 1st. A mover, please. Councillor Pearson, seconded by Councillor Brenda Johnson. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Staff presentations. General Manager Dan McKinnon, would you please come down to the floor? There's a very important podium there, General Manager Dan McKinnon, that we would like you to stand behind. You've got your entourage of important people up in the gallery. And I think, what is this, Dan? Is this your second budget presentation as GM?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, it is.
Wonderful. All the rest of the morning, since you're the only budget presentation, the rest of the time is yours, Dan. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, for that introduction. And 2017 does mark my first full year in the general manager's position, and it was an interesting year. Certainly, before I get started with the presentation, I want to acknowledge the leadership team in Public Works. As I was reviewing my presentation last night, I was reflecting on 2017, and there was only a couple of adjectives, I guess, that came to mind, is that it really was a year of transition and change for Public Works in a number of ways. Just as a reminder to committee, we actually undertook 2 organizational restructurings in Public Works throughout 2017. One was in February, and then one was again in late November. And just, I'll mention this later, but as a bit of a qualification here, that the budget that is presented does not reflect the organizational changes that happened at the end of November. There's not a significant budget benefit this for 2018, but on the org structure, I'll point that out as we go through. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to pull that off before the budget got printed, but as I mentioned, the numbers are all right. The benefits from a budget perspective, we will see those throughout 2018. So with that, I do want to just remind, I know committee knows the leadership team, but I just want to recognize them. So I'll start with Gary Moore, the Director of Engineering, better known as Dr. No. I'd also like to get Gord to give a wave there as well. So the last restructuring that we did just before Christmas, we're basically split engineering services for this year. So Gord's the Acting Director of essentially corridor management and asset management, so the front end processes that are associated with the engineering services group. And that is really a recognition for the workload that Gary's going to have this year in his efforts to represent Public Works on the LRT project and some other initiatives that we have going forward. Rome D'Angelo, who is the Director of Energy Fleet Facilities, back in February I asked Rome to take on a lot more responsibility with the Energy Office and the facilities, or the fleet group, and I can tell you that he's done an amazing job. I can see a lot of the benefits from Rome's leadership styles in that division. The culture is improving, and things are going very well. One of the things that may not have been as obvious to people is the extra work that Craig Murdoch took on in environmental services. So Craig was leading the parks, cemeteries, forestry, and horticulture group. Now he's taken on the waste management portfolio as well, so collections, the landfills, the transfer stations, the organics facilities. So his portfolio essentially doubled throughout 2017. Unfortunately, Betty's not here today. She had a commitment that she had made before the schedule was set for the budget process. So I know where Betty is today, and she's in a very good place today. She's on vacation. So Martin is sitting in for Betty. And again, more changes for that group. It is now the Roads and Traffic Division, for those, just as a reminder. And then our newest member of the leadership team with Debbie Dalvado running Transit. And so I know you've gotten to know Debbie, especially a few weeks ago when she did Transit Day. A couple other notables, and I'll just remind as I go through the presentation as well, Andrew Grice is the new head of the Hamilton Water Division. And while that's not necessarily germane to the budget discussions today, he is a key member of our leadership team. And then I just want to acknowledge John Mader. So, and I'll point that out with the org structure, that John has, at the risk of saying too much, I think it's well known, that John is planning to retire this year. And John is working as Associate General Manager of Public Works out of my office. John is helping with a lot of transitional work, the traffic operations and engineering group moving to roads. John's helping with that. The transportation planning group that's moved over into planning and ECDEV, John is helping with that. I know he's assisting Jason with the interviews for some key positions there. John also represents Public Works on the business improvement team, and he's also got an active role in the disposition of the lands on Pier 8 on the evaluation team there. So John's doing some strategic work for us throughout this year. So I just really want to acknowledge the support that I've had from this group through a year of pretty significant transition. I think Public Works kind of hummed along for the most part without too much controversy, and that really is a credit to the great work that these folks do every day. There's a couple other people in the gallery. I have a big team here. We want to make sure that we have the right people here to answer any questions that you might have. But I do want to, first I'm going to ask Jasmine Graham to just give us a wave here. Jazz is our communications expert in Public Works, and if you think that this presentation is slick in any way, that's probably credit to Jazz. I think she did a great job putting the presentation together today for me. And Joel McCormick, if you'd give us a wave. Joel, I introduced you to Joel last year at Budget. Joel is on an 18-month secondment in my office as part of a leadership development program. He'll only be with me probably until the summer, but he's done an amazing job. A lot of the detail and the grunt work behind the budget presentation was done by Joel, and I know that it's been kind of dominating his time over the last couple of weeks. So I really want to acknowledge them and give them kudos for the great work that they did on the presentation. And forgive me, I'm fighting a bit of a cold here, so I'll try to keep the sniffles to a minimum. There is one other person here that I know is going to hate when I do this, but she may be here for her last budget. Anna Akpakarian, who is going to give us a wave. And Anna is the manager of... Sorry, Anna, I had to do it. Anna actually reports through Brian McMullen up to Mike Zagaric in finance, but Anna is my finance manager for Public Works. She keeps an eye on all the finances and helps me tremendously with the budget. She has shown tremendous patience with me over the last year and a half and has been an amazing support for me. And there is a very good chance this might be her last budget process. So I just want to acknowledge the great work that Anne has done and her support over the last number of months. I really appreciate that.
Dan, treat her very well. She's of my blood background, so carry on, Dan. Anyways.
We try to, when I'm not frustrating her, I try to do my best to treat her well. So this is having said all of that, I will jump right into it. So as an example of... moving on the computer, but not on the screen.
Do we need some... Daryl, can you kindly come down, please, to help us out here? That'd be great. There we go. All right. Well, with a brand-new system, there are going to be little glitches along the way, and I'm glad, Daryl, you've hung around this month of February to make sure we have somebody like you available just for situations like this. Is the laptop there? Here we go. Well, Daryl, thank you. Very good.
Okay, so the description of Public Works that you see in the budget book, so probably a little more poetic than I would have been able to come up with on my own, but it really does describe the services, the essential services that Public Works provides to the City of Hamilton. Just as a reminder, our connection to the Service Delivery Review document, Public Works provides 16 services and 60 sub-services as identified through this document. I would argue that probably the most recognizable services that the residents of the city receive are probably through Public Works for the most part. As we go through the highlights, it became very evident to me throughout 2017 the emotional reaction that people have to the work that our horticulture folks do. So I chose this picture to kick it off in order to set the mood in the room, maybe get some, get the mood in the right place as we go through the presentation. As we talked about the highlights for 2017, we're going to make the connection to the strategic plan, and I think typically people would look at 2 or 3 of the priorities in the strategic plan and say that that's where Public Works really has a strong influence. But I would argue that we have influence on every one of the priorities in the strategic plan, and as we go through the work that we've done in 2017, I hope that becomes obvious, because I think as a leadership group, and I think the folks in the audience there do see themselves in all of the priorities. So. The one that's probably most obvious is the clean and green, and that photograph there is our contractor who is out doing work on the LED light replacement, which is one of the projects that we're going to highlight. So just by way of some statistics, the first one there with the LED light replacement, we found a way, Gord McGuire and his team have done some excellent work on that, and they found a way to speed up the schedule on that so we can enjoy the benefits from a financial perspective on the lower energy consumption there. We are hoping to have the entire light conversion done by about the third quarter of this year. I won't go through every one of the statistics on the slide there. I will only highlight a couple. This one here is kind of an interesting one here. Out at the Glanbrook landfill, they've implemented these floating gardens, and that is to treat the runoff water for the precipitation that falls on the landfill. That runoff has a fair number of components to it that is not safe to be released into the environment. And this is really one of those examples where, we need to, as much as we can, try to mimic nature with the infrastructure that we build. So implementing the floating mats is a great way to treat that water that's running off. The other one that's primary consideration for us as we go forward when we think about climate change is we saw a 1.9% reduction in our overall energy consumption between 2016 and 2017. And I can't highlight enough the great work that the Energy Office does in this regard. They interact with all of the operational groups within Public Works as well as broader agencies outside of Public Works to try to find projects and opportunities to reduce our carbon footprint through energy consumption. And we are well on our way to meeting our 2030 targets as it results to energy intensity, and it's as a result of the great work that team is doing. I guess the only other metric that I'll point out here is the diversion rate for waste collection. You can see the metrics there associated with how much material went into the landfills and how much was recycled. The 42.4%, we're really just kind of hovering around that as a fairly steady number now with waste management. We would like to drive that higher, and we're going to continue to look for opportunities to do that. But one of the things that Hamilton truly benefits from is the fact that we have a landfill that's got a significant amount of lifetime left in it. But having said that, that doesn't necessarily mean we should lose any sense of urgency in trying to drive up those numbers around diversion. Built environment and infrastructure. So I think this is probably the number one priority in the strategic plan where people would recognize the influence that Public Works has. Chose this slide. This is the construction for the greenhouse at Gage Park. And a lot of the infrastructure that we look after and we maintain is utilitarian, and it's maybe not all that kind of sexy. But every once in a while we get an opportunity to build a project that really, I think, will touches people kind of at a different level. And That's why I wanted to put it as part of the presentation. Those prefab glue lamp trusses, they will be exposed so that people who visit the greenhouse will be able to see that. It's a beautiful architectural detail. So we were very excited about the fact that the greenhouse will be coming online before Christmas this year, and it really will become one of the centerpieces of Gage Park. Just some of the other big projects that are going on. We can't talk about public works without talking about our assets and our infrastructure, and then all the capital that we deliver. So again, we commenced the construction of the Gage Park greenhouse. We started the construction of William Connell Citywide Park, and for those of you who are unfamiliar with this is up in Ward 8, right off of West 5th. This is a 20-hectare, 50-acre park that is being constructed in the center of the South Mountain, and it has really got it's quite a large facility, and it's going to be a real centerpiece of from a parkland perspective as we go forward. Some of the other renovations that were completed this year, you'll see them there in Beverly, Waterdown, Ancaster, and the Montgomery Park Fieldhouse. Now to some of that utilitarian style infrastructure that probably nobody notices. We've started the stage 3 of the Glanbrook landfill, and again, this is a very important piece of the services that we provide to the city of Hamilton, and really central to the quality of life that we have. And while that might not gather a lot of kind of poetic accolades around the look of it, it's certainly a very important project for us going forward. One of the other things that was an emphasis as we started 2017, there was a lot of attention on the Claremont access, and certainly we need to spend a lot more energy going forward just monitoring the escarpment faces. We have a lot of escarpment accesses that rely on a stable condition of the escarpment face, so that's something that we're beefing up in this budget, and going forward Sam and his team will be doing a complete asset management program on the escarpment faces, and Betty's team will be continuing to monitor from a maintenance perspective as we observe what's going on with the face of the escarpment. One of the compliments that we have to give Gary is that he tendered 95% of the right-of-way capital program. That's a metric that I think Gary and his team have consistently hit. So it's, we get a fairly large quantum of money to spend from a capital perspective, but getting it out the door and getting that work completed is really important. And I think Gary's done a tremendous job of hitting that 95% over the years. So I'm deviating just a little bit from the template that we're using as part of these budget presentations, just to share some photographs. I'll just let them hang there on the screen for a minute. But really, it's because we do deliver so much capital, I felt it would be a bit of an injustice if we didn't at least share some of the photographs of some of the great capital work that's happening across the city. And just to highlight again, there's the Sherman access, the westbound portion of it that was shut for quite a period of time. And again, that all relates to the escarpment face and our ability to sustain our transit network right up against the escarpment face. Some of the other projects that are happening. Healthy and safe communities. More and more we see public works as making a very strong connection to this priority in the strategic plan. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what that is actually a camera that's mounted on inside one of our buses. Debbie alluded to this on Transit Day, that's part of the ongoing, continuing investment that this council has made in transit, the significance investment that this council has made in transit over the years. And so those types of cameras are on all of our buses now. I think we have 219 of the buses that are outfitted with these. And on an articulated bus, there's 11 of these cameras on a single articulated bus. So quite a significant investment, and really to help keep our drivers and our passengers safer while they're using our system. So healthy and safe communities as a priority. Our advanced traffic management system, we installed another 50 cameras throughout that system. And just as a reminder, that is the cameras that help monitor the traffic network, the transportation network. Had a brief conversation with John about it this morning. Our goal is to, over time, to have enough cameras across the entire transportation network so that the automation can be built in so that it can deal with traffic congestion in real time. And that's something that we could have benefited from yesterday. We had an event down here at King and James, and so this is something that going forward we hope that the investment that we continue to make, and it will help move traffic more efficiently through the community. Year 5 of the Emerald Ash Borer Management Program. You may wonder why we have that under Health and Safe Communities, but really that program is about keeping the community safe, because as these trees die, they do present a real public hazard, and so we're halfway through that program and making good progress on that. our people in performance. One of the things I want to point out, first of all, is that on the we successfully surveyed, the last bullet there, 65% of staff participated in Public Works to take part in the survey, to answer questions that we asked them about the organization. That's a really good number. It wasn't as high as we had hoped to get. I can tell you through the previous rounds of the Denison survey, we've had, I don't know if we got quite that high, but we've had really good engagement from our teams throughout Public Works when we ask them questions about the workplace. And Matt Lachance is one of our operators in forestry. And that photograph that you're looking at was his idea. I think that's a tremendous photograph that the staff on their own came up with this idea to build some momentum and some hype around the Our People survey, to get their team together and to come together to make this photograph. So I know that Craig Murdoch and Leanne Seeley, I don't think they were even aware of this until they were invited down that morning to come to be in the photograph with it. Matt was what we call a culture ambassador, and the ambassador teams and the culture teams that were created through the previous Denison surveys was the way that we could take the information that we get from these surveys, and we get our frontline staff engaged in helping us understand how to deal with the information and the themes that emerge from these surveys. So this, I think this is a great reflection of how the culture is beginning to change and is continuing to change in Public Works and the broader organization when you have frontline staff coming up with these types of ideas to help us move a corporate initiative. Implementation of performance measurement program and balanced scorecard. I'm going to allude to that a little further into the presentation, but that really helps us to demonstrate to the community how we're working, how we're operating, how effective we are, but it also helps us to manage our own staff. And then the cutting edge of leadership. This year we put 64 staff through the cutting edge of leadership. Cutting edge of leadership actually began in Public Works a number of years ago when we've put probably hundreds of candidates through it. That is really, really important for us to start to train our future leaders in the organization, not unlike the comments I made about Joel and his role in my office. We have to have a number of programs in order to bring the future leaders of this organization and get them ready for when we have times of transition like we're going through right now. So very pleased that the organization is moving in that regard, and Public Works was very active in that program this year. Community engagement participation, and this is one of those areas of the strategic plan, one of the priorities that people may not be as obvious to people, but the role that Public Works can play. That photograph that you're looking at right there is one of 4 gathering areas along the Red Hill Valley Parkway. And obviously it's a turtle, so it's a gathering area. There's trails, there's going to be some vegetation planted there and some benches. This work was done through the Joint Stewardship Board with our staff in landscape architecture and Jen DiDomenico's group and the landscape architecture group to work with the Joint Stewardship Board to come up with the design of this in the Haudenosaunee community, to follow the designs and really the spirit of what's intended by these facilities. So very excited about this. I believe we have 2 more of these gathering places that are going to be constructed in the next couple of years. But I think it's a great example of how Public Works can engage with the community to build infrastructure. Just a couple of other example of how we can engage with the community. I talked about the Joint Stewardship Board, and that's an ongoing relationship that in 2018 we're going to do what we can to try to enhance that relationship and find more opportunities to work together. One of the other areas that is the transit route redesign, or the rationalization of our transit routes. We are engaging with McMaster University and the Institute of Transportation and Logistics. We've already engaged with them, and they're going to help us communicate with the community to talk about what the community thinks of the routes that we have in the transit network and how we can make that better going forward. And then on a regular basis, we have, through the environmental assessment process, we have information centers with the public. So we are out in the public on a regular basis, communicating with them and engaging and asking for their opinion. Economic prosperity and growth. So Open for Business. We have undertaken a variety of things in the background to try to work with Jason Thorne's group to improve the throughput of development applications as they come forward. I can tell you that the work that occurred in Hamilton Water over the last couple of years, we've put resources right within the planning group to try to move Form 1 applications, to screen them ahead of time so that developers aren't waiting as long to get feedback from Public Works. And we've also done other things like film permit consolidation. We're trying to make these little processes where the private sector has to interact with Public Works. We're trying to make it faster. We're trying to make our expectations more clear so that they can move faster through those processes. One of the things that personally is something that I'm proud about that we did this year in Public Works was the Hamilton Youth in Construction Project. We ran a pilot project in consultation and in collaboration with the Neighborhood Action Strategy and the Experience Annex and Paul Johnson's shop to reach out to those younger people in the community who may not have had an opportunity or the mentors in their life to give them a chance to learn some skills around construction. So we reached out to the HAND Association, which is the Hamilton and Niagara District Heavy Construction Association, reached out to LIUNA, and then we brought in the Neighborhood Action Strategy group to see whether or not there was a way that we could select a group of people who would be good candidates to train in the construction trades, and then working with those contractors, try to give them an opportunity to get out on site. So the people you see in that picture was the first group that we put through. There was 8 candidates that went through, and I can tell you 7 of them actually got work with local contractors. Many of them worked for several months throughout last year, and I don't know if this is just my optimism about the program, but everybody associated with the program thought it was a tremendous success. So going through in 2018, we're looking at how we can broaden that out to a different sector of the contracting industry. We're going to go to general contractors. We're going to try to get them involved. We're going to try to put more young people through this process. But it really was a success in 2017 and another example of how Public Works can have an influence on those strategic priorities that may not be so obvious. And then the last bullet on there is a conversation that I've started to have with Tina Iacco in our procurement group and the idea of social procurement. We have a tremendous amount of capital that's going to be spent in this community over the next decade, and so finding ways to have a social benefit as a result of all that money that's being spent in the city. I'm hopeful that maybe somehow this pilot that we've done with the youth in construction can become a pipeline to some of those contracts down the road, and maybe we can build some incentives into those procurement documents to incent the contracting community to bring some of these people on board, because I think I don't think it's lost on anybody here that a lot of these young people, all they need is a mentor and an opportunity, and I think that as a Public Works Department, we might have the ability to create that opportunity for them. Continuous improvement. So, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I do just want to acknowledge one more person in the audience, Patricia Leishman, if she could give us a wave. So I want to introduce you to Pat. Pat is the superintendent who works out of my office and is in charge of continuous improvement. Pat joined us about 14 months ago from Rockwell International, where she was the global practice leader for innovation and continuous improvement. Pat had staff all over the world, and I feel very fortunate that I was able to lure her to Hamilton. And while she's not kind of born and bred in Hamilton, she's been a resident in Dundas for 35 years, so I think we'll call her our own. So the fact that she was a global practice leader for a company like Rockwell International and Siemens before that, and she's from Hamilton, it just demonstrates the type of talent that we have in Hamilton. So bringing Pat on board last year, I sat down with her to develop our work plan for 2017. And when I asked Pat to try to get 25 continuous improvement projects done throughout 2017, I think she was a little bit apprehensive. But I think this is probably one of the slides I'm most excited about when you look at some of the metrics on there. So notwithstanding Pat's apprehension, we started 66 projects throughout 2017, and we closed 34 of them. One of the things that, when we talk about engaging the front line, and that's what we heard about through the Denison survey, and we heard about it again through our people surveys, and I don't think it's lost on this committee, is you have to get the front line involved. It's naive of us to think as leaders that we have all the answers, and I think one of the things that shows the benefit of this, the work that we did in 2017, is that we generated 220 ideas, and we have over 350 staff involved in all these projects across Public Works. We have 20 green belts now in Public Works, and we brought on 9 new ones throughout the year. So one of the things that we have to do throughout 2018, we're going to try to refine, is the process to try to understand is, we got lots of projects, we saw lots of benefit from this, there's a lot of enthusiasm and excitement about this, but what does it mean to the bottom line? We feel that we've generated about $700,000 in business benefit as a result of undertaking these projects this year. Some of that will fall out to the bottom line. I think some of that is why Public Works has been able to come in with the budget that you're going to see in a few slides. But a lot of it is really just about finding efficiencies. And I think that this is going to be a very important initiative going forward, and I think we've had a tremendous year for our first year. Issues and trends. This is always an important slide for our section for Public Works. For those of you who do not recognize that picture, that is the waterfront trail at Confederation Beach Park. And that is what happens when the lake levels come up 2 or 3 feet and stay there for a long period of time. The combination of the elevated lake levels and the strong northeasterly winds that we continue to have during the summer caused all kinds of damage in a variety of locations along the waterfront, and I'm going to speak to that in a few slides. So when we think about the issues and trends that we had to deal with throughout 2017, certainly extreme weather and climate change, we're probably going to talk about this every year, but it's going to manifest itself differently every year. The photograph on the right there is actually Bayfront Park, the trail that goes from Bayfront Park to Cootes Paradise, and certainly sustained a significant amount of damage there. We're still estimating it could be upwards of $1 million to fix that trail. And one of the things we're going to have to decide is what water levels should we be designing for when we build a new trail. We're going to have to raise it in a number of locations so that we don't experience the same type of damage if we have these increased water levels again. One of the things that may not be obvious to the general public and those listening is the idea of legislation and the fact that it's constantly changing. And some of the work that has to happen in advance of legislation changing is often, whether it's the province or the federal government, they issue white papers and they ask for communities to respond back to that. The Waste-Free Ontario Act in 2017 generated about 400 hours of person time within the Waste Management Group, just reviewing the white papers, writing reports to the committee, going to focus groups, and trying to understand the direction that the province is going and try to formulate the response that the City of Hamilton would have to those pieces of legislation that are coming out. So 400 hours is a lot of effort. Members of Public Works Committee may appreciate that we've talked a lot about this new legislation that's coming out around waste management. We've been there a number of times. I think that's probably an example of where the province is maybe getting it right by communicating with us a lot in advance, because this is going to make some fundamental changes to the way we deal with waste in the community. The other thing that is, when we talk about transition and change throughout 2017, is workforce management. Retirements is certainly something that's affecting us in a larger way now. I can tell you from 2010 to 2015, the average retirement rate for the City of Hamilton was around 2.7%. That's jumped almost a full point and a half throughout 2016 and 2017. I can tell you every week I'm signing letters congratulating people on their retirement. The pace at which just seems to be increasing every day. And it's going to have some dramatic effects on the leadership team in Public Works as we go forward. I know that there's some new faces in the gallery, new managers there, and we're going to see some significant changes with the leadership across Public Works throughout 2017 as a result of, or 18 as a result of retirements. Issues and trends. I think the natural gas story in Hamilton is a really good story, but what I think it illustrates is that these are some of the challenges we have when we put together our budgets, is our forecasting that we have to do going forward. I've included this slide to represent the spot market for natural gas, and this is in January of 2018. So you can see the volatility that there is in energy markets, and our energy group does an excellent job in trying to deal with that and try to make it more predictable and more stable as we develop our budgets. So I can tell you that we do hedge with natural gas, so that the green line is what we pay, but it shows the volatility and the exposure that you have in these markets, and that's never going to change. It's always going to be that way. I've noticed myself that the cost of petroleum or gasoline is starting to inch up again. So when we develop these budgets, we have to be, we want to be cautious. We're also sensitive to the fact that committee and council want to keep our property taxes low, but we also have to build some caution into our forecasting so that we don't have large negative variances at the end of the year. And then the lease contracts and accommodations, the master accommodation plan will start to determine where we're going to have our staff residing in the lower city as we go forward through the next number of years. So that's going to be coming forward, and a lot of work was done on that throughout 2017. So we look at trends and issues over the next 3 years. Technology is a big one. We had a conversation the other day about Where's My Plow app. I think the infrastructure that we need to build, the back-end systems that we need to build in order to be able to handle the information that's going to move back and forth, whether it's the transit app where people are trying to use the transit network, whether it's the Where's My Plow app. And in addition to that, the way that we need to manage our staff out in the field, we have to keep making these investments in technology. I think we've got a bit of catch-up to do in that regard. One of the other areas that may not be obvious to people is the document and data control. Public Works, just by the very nature of our work, we carry a lot of risk. So document control and the development of procedures is very important across Public Works. and where you house those documents is important so that you've got some consistency and you've got some defense if you're ever defending a claim. So that's another investment that we're making through across Public Works for the next number of years. Growth is always going to be a challenge. All the news that you hear about growth in the city of Hamilton is always positive, but it really does create some strain on Public Works, making sure that we can handle that growth, whether it's the transportation network or our sewer networks. It does require for Public Works to support the Planning and ECDEV group in a very big way to make sure that these new developments can happen in a successful way. And then collective bargaining, I think Nancy and Laura Fontana have alluded to this at some of their comments to committee and council over the last couple of months. We're coming to the end of 2018 where a lot of collective bargaining agreements will be coming due, so that always creates an element of risk in ensuring that whatever those new agreements, whatever they land on from the financial quantum, is consistent with where council wants us to take the property tax increases. Again, legislation. Going forward, there is a number of pieces of legislation that are going to be coming on to us that we're going to have to respond to. New legislation generally equals more money in one way or another. A couple of pieces that I just want to highlight there is that the Construction Lien Act, that's going to require us with our big capital that we're going to be delivering over the next decade. It increases our obligations to pay faster to our contractors. The prompt payment clauses in there are going to create some challenges for us bureaucratically to make sure that when work is done, we can get the payment to the contractor in an expedient way. That's going to create some challenges for us. The Bill 148, the Fair Workplaces, one of the things that Nancy spoke to committee the other day about was the personal emergency leave days, and I can tell you the way that some of the impacts we're starting to feel this already. In 2017, in January, HSR experienced about 47 occasions of people taking personal emergency leave days. And just as a reminder, under legislation, you get 10 personal emergency leave days every year, but the change that happened this year is now the first 2 of those days is paid for. Previously, all 10 were not paid for. Now the first 2 are paid for. So 47 days last January, this January 131. So we've seen almost a 2.5-fold increase in the occasion of personal emergency leave days being taken. And as you can imagine, that has an immediate and complicating effect on our ability to get our service on the road every day. And we're all very aware of the issues we've had around canceled service. So I do want to compliment Debbie and her team, some of the changes that they made to the schedule prior to Christmas, freeing up some extra operators, refining some of the routes. I think that this has just been a little bump in the road, the PEL days, as a result of the great work that Debbie and her team have done to refine those schedules. And again, going forward, at the risk of repeating myself, I am concerned about the exit of senior staff through all ranks of Public Works, and I think that's the same for the broader organization. Not only does it require you to recruit new people, you do lose a lot of that tacit knowledge that existed in the organization over a long period of time. So when you're dealing with issues of a historical nature, you don't have that benefit of being able to go to one of your senior staff who has been there and done that before. So that's going to continue to be a challenge for us over the next many years. Again, the energy and fuel markets, they can be affected by weather as well. So we're going to have to keep a close eye on that, which is going to make us even more reliant on our energy office. Extreme weather, we've got lots of examples this year, so it's going to be difficult to know what kind of weather we're going to experience going forward. I guess the area on this slide that I'd want to focus on is the contract renewals. So not only is the province revamping the way that waste is going to be managed in the province over the next 3 years, a lot of our contracts are coming up for renewal. So over the next 2-3 years, we're going to see the operation of our composting facility, our materials recycling facility, our waste collections, our transfer stations. Almost every aspect of our waste management system is going to be coming up for renewal. So we're not going to have that predictability of the contract language that tells us how much the escalation will be year after year. We're going to have to go out to the market, and that's always a risk. We may get better prices. My sense is that the prices are probably going to escalate to some degree, but the best way that we can deal with that is just to make sure that we have a fair and open, transparent process. In addition to that, our winter control, the big contract that we have for winter control, that's going to be coming up in 2020 as well. So we do have some risk going forward with respect to some of these larger contracts that provide, fundamental services to the city. So not too concerned about them right now, just putting a marker out there for the future. So I do want to digress a little bit and just talk about capital. And I know that this budget before you is about operating, but I think this is an important message to share with the committee and for those folks who are at home. This information was brought to Public Works early in 2017, and this is how we talk about the condition index of our road network. And so the system is based on a score of 100, and it's no different than when we were in school. An 80 is a pretty good mark, 60 not so great. So we've just given some examples there of Upper Sherman was just reconstructed this year, so the condition index would be at 100%, and that would make sense. That's intuitive. A brand new road should be at 100%. Every 5 years, we go across the entire city and we evaluate the conditions of the road, and then we score them all. The last time we did that was in 2014. We're going to be doing it again in 2019. So some of this information is a wee bit out of date, but it'll prove the idea here. So Rymo Road between West 5th and Garth right now is rated around a 45. And that is below the overall average of the city roads. And then we've got Parkdale Avenue near Nikola Tesla Boulevard is down around a 25 at the moment. So what happens over time, right now the overall city average is 62. And right now we have anywhere between $25 and $28 million a year that we put in to the road program. And I just want to slow down for a minute there. Council will be familiar with what looks like road program levy budget of about $80 million. But when you take away all the other work that's being done around traffic lights and pavement markings and other work, we end up with something called life cycle replacement. And life cycle replacement is really what asset management theory is all about. It's that investment of money that you are putting into your system to extend the life of that system. And so I know I've heard Gary talk about this a number of times. So $25.5 million, this is what's going to happen if we maintain $25.5 million over the next decade. Our overall condition index of our road network is going to decline from 62 to 54 if we maintain that $25 million a year life cycle investment. If we want to maintain the 62, we're going to have to escalate that life cycle portion of the road program, the capital program. We're going to have to increase that to about $52 million. And I appreciate that's a significant increase. So if we looked at the quantum of capital that's dedicated to the road corridor at the moment, that would squeeze out a lot of the other things that we do around lights, pedestrian crossovers, pavement markings, all those other things that are kind of baked into the road corridor capital funding. Here's why it's important to the operating budget. Because as you start to see the road decline, your operating costs associated with that section of roadway are going to increase. And I suspect that many of us know this kind of in theory, but when you start to look at the numbers that can be associated with maintaining those roads, it can really start to drive your operating budgets. So my concern going forward from 2018 and onward is that, notwithstanding the fact that I've only been the GM for a year, I have never seen potholes on roads in Hamilton's like I have seen this year. And so I think that probably many of you are getting phone calls about that. My concern is that I think we're starting to see that by virtue of the life cycle investment levels that we've had for a while, we're starting to see the effect that it's having on our road network. Not only that, but we had terrible winters in 2014 and 2015, and this is just a personal theory of mine. I think we're really starting to see the effects of those two extraordinarily bad winters on our pavement structures across the transportation network in Hamilton. So those percentages that you see along the bottom here, right now, 61% of our road network is in the good, 37 is in the fair, 0.9 is in the poor. And my apprehension is that when we go out in 2019 and we do the condition assessment again, I do have a concern that this is going to rise, and it could rise dramatically. And then that will have an effect on our operating budgets, because now it's Betty's team that's going to have to go out there and patch potholes and do the things that we need to do from a maintenance perspective. So again, this is kind of a forward-looking concern about issues and trends that are going to be coming at us, and notwithstanding the fact that I'm talking about capital, it does have a correlation to the operating and maintenance costs. One of the pieces of legislation that we identified earlier, and I know Mike's given an update to committee several months ago, was Bill 6, so the Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act. This is about asset management. So just to remind council and committee, I think you've seen this slide before. When we talk about asset management, I think Gary's team has developed a national reputation for how well we do asset management. But that asset management that we're talking about in that regard is within the road allowance. It's the roads, the sewers, the bridges, the water, everything that's in the road corridor. But asset management extends to a variety of areas across the entire organization, and Bill 6 is going to force us to come up with a plan on how we're going to deal with asset management across the organization. So if I look here, so in Public Works, here's all the areas of Public Works where we have to do asset management. And when we talk about the great work that's been done here over the last decade, it's this asset management that quite often we refer to. We are doing some in Hamilton Water, and we do a little bit in Energy Fleet and Facilities. But even within Public Works, there's areas where we have to do more work to become compliant with Bill 6. Now that's just in Public Works. Here's the other areas: housing, heritage, police, lodges, and other areas of the organization where we don't have advanced asset management programs, but we're going to have to build them in order to become compliant to this legislation that's coming forward in the next few years. So you're going to start to hear this, this cascade of reports coming to you about asset management. I think we have to approve a policy before the summer that just talks about the city's commitment to asset management to be compliant with Bill 6. But not unlike the transportation network, when you don't spend money from a capital perspective, it starts to drive up your operating costs. So my concern obviously is if you have a rec center, and I think we've experienced this in the last number of years, where it gets to the point where you might actually have to close a rec center, that becomes much more problematic when if it were to be a portion of our transportation network. So I know this sounds a little doom and gloom, but it is a concern going into the future that I think we're well positioned to get ahead of it, but just as a marker there. So back to the format that you've seen some of the other budget presentations: metrics of Public Works. Public Works provides services to the community, but we have this inherent relationship with our assets, because some of our assets provide the service, some of our staff provide the services, and it's this dance that we do with our infrastructure. And then a lot of our effort is done, that we do, is to look after those assets. So just some of the significant assets that we have. I'm sure a lot of this looks a little different than maybe what you're used to, but just to give you a sense of the size and scale, City of Hamilton has about $20 billion worth of assets. There's 4 asset classes that compose 3/4 of it. That's the wastewater network is the most valuable class of assets that the city has, followed closely by the road network, followed by the water network, and then the storm network. And then there's a whole bunch of smaller categories of assets that we look after. Then when we talk about performance metrics, these are some of the higher order performance metrics that become top of mind for our staff and for council. Just a little clarification there that's 53,000 acres of parkland that we mow every year. I included this slide just to give some scale. This was kind of a last-minute addition, and I guess more than anything, just an appreciation that this is just out of the Hansen system. So this represents about 50 to 60% of the activity that Public Works deals with on an annual basis. So 210,000 work orders and 101,000 service requests that were dealt with throughout Public Works just through 2017. This doesn't include our Archibus system, which looks after all of our facilities, nor does it look after, or does it reflect the work that gets done at our vertical facilities in water and wastewater. So really just the scale of the activity in Public Works is significant. So as we have all this conversation about metrics and how we want to share that information with the community, we developed the balanced scorecard for Public Works throughout 2017, and I know it's a little bit difficult to read. It's still under construction. One of the things that you learn about continuous improvement is that you change things year after year. So we're going to be making some tweaks to the Public Works scorecard throughout 2018 to be more reflective of what our reality is. And part of that change is going to affect the divisions and the sections. But what this does is now this cascades into the information that we're sharing with the community, and I've only taken a snapshot of a few key performance indicators. So these are ones where we've seen some positive trends, and you'll see some of these in the citizen-facing dashboard that was released not that long ago. So the idea is that right down to the sectional level, we're measuring the right metrics, and we're watching them on a regular basis, and then they roll up into a Public Works-wide scoreboard that then rolls up into a corporate scoreboard. And really this is all around the trust and confidence that we try to generate with the community. I've heard lots of conversation about we should run more like a business. The reality is we can't just run like a business, but I think we can use some of that business acumen and discipline to run our operations. And where profit might be the hallmark in the private sector, trust and confidence is certainly something that we need to get from our community, and we need to demonstrate that we've earned from them. So by sharing these types of performance indicators and showing them the good news and the bad news, I think that does that. So some good news on this slide, but here's just a couple of performance indicators that weren't so great. Many of you know that we've had some service issues around canceled service and transit. And I do want to highlight these other two metrics. 0 confirmed adverse water quality events. 0 target is pretty high standard, and we missed it by 1 this year. Same thing with exceedances out of our wastewater treatment plants. Again, we don't want to have any exceedances, and we did have 1 this year. So I think this is the kind of information that we should be sharing with the community to show them how we're performing. And I think we really just put a stake in the ground in 2017 as far as operating this way. And I think that we're really going to generate a lot of momentum, certainly in Public Works, and I expect across the organization to get more and more meaningful metrics that will mean something to the community and will help us to operate our businesses. So again, as I mentioned, the scorecards throughout 2018 in Public Works, we're going to go right down to the sectional levels. They'll go up to the divisional level, and this is how it ascends to the trust and confidence report that will reside on the city's website. So looking forward in 2018. So part of the budget that you have before you for consideration includes year 3 of the 10-year strategy. It also includes finances in order to allow us to move on with our asset management work for the escarpment phase. We're also doing some project management standardization across Public Works, and by extension I think that will be able to help support the organization. And then year 6 of the Emerald Ash Borer will be underway, and that just gives you a sense of the graph there on the right, the performance and the productivity of the Emerald Ash Borer removal, the Emerald Ash tree removal across the city. Major initiatives for 2018, that's a rendering of the Bernie Morelli Center, so we're very excited about that. I know when Paul was up here, I was listening to his presentation, and I think that's going to be a tremendous opening and a tremendous opportunity for that part of the city. Rome's teams have been working hard on the 50 Main Street, so we can get the Provincial Offences Administration Office open over there, and I think we're still on plan to do that in the next 3 months. I mentioned the Gage Park Greenhouse. One of the areas that we made some progress on this year is the Corporate Security Office. When it became evident, once I assumed my new responsibilities, I had always had a concern about security when it came to Hamilton Water, and now that I see the issues that we face kind of corporately, we've got a dedicated resource in Rome shop now. We just had a successful recruitment, so we've got somebody on board who's got 10 years worth of municipal experience. So we're hoping to get some traction on the Corporate Security Office throughout 2018. We want to leverage technology. Again, going back to the conversation about apps and the way the community wants to interact with us, we have to make those investments in technology. And in order to demonstrate that we're being efficient, we have to also invest in the technology that allows our work to be managed out in the field. So whether it's CityWorks, these mobile tablet devices that allow people to create work orders and service requests in the field, and allows that to talk to a back-end unit so that we can get that information and make good use of it quicker. Public Works is also a fundamental actor with the waterfront development. We're doing all the servicing down there. Not only are we going to be putting on all the water, the sewer, and the roads, but as I mentioned earlier, John's acting on the evaluation team for the disposition of the lands down there to a developer. So we're playing a very active role there. And then our people survey. Looking forward to, I've already started to scan through some of the information that I got out of the survey. I know that committee is going to hear that in a couple of weeks. Looking forward to engaging with our staff again to see how we can roll out some of the themes that emerge from the information that we receive from our staff. Major initiatives for 2019 to 21. So again, energy intensity is something that is going to always have a high profile on my scorecard. And I can tell you that the goal was to get 20% below 2005 levels by 2020. The great news is we've already exceeded that, and we're already on our way to the 2030 levels of 45%. Again, the contracts that I identified earlier, we have a bit of a risk there, but we're hoping that a competitive process is going to help to mitigate any cost increases that may be associated with those. And then again, just the emphasis on technology. I won't repeat myself with some of these things that are on the slide, but I guess one of the things that's going to be top of mind as we go through, and this will be important for Gary because of his role on the LRT project. Gary will be representing Public Works on the LRT project, and then as things come to a successful conclusion through this year, the idea would be that Gary would be the dedicated representative on the LRT project for the City of Hamilton and specifically Public Works. And then we're going to continue on with the 10-year transit strategy. So, again, going back to the theme of flowers and getting everybody in a good mood now that we're getting to the actual budget slides. So this is this is what the organization looked like just as the budget was printed. So we had 7 divisions, and this is what the organization looks like now. So I'll just go back and forth for a minute. So if I highlight that we had a transportation division that was headed by John Mader, and as a result of the analysis, the ongoing analysis that we were doing and the work that the organizational design criteria that we developed with Core International, we come up with this structure. So what's essentially happened here is John has moved into my office full-time as the Associate General Manager, and many of the groups that were in his transportation group have now moved over into the roads and traffic group. So what was formerly called operations is now roads and traffic, and we have the traffic operations and policy and planning group that have moved in under Betty. Transit stayed the same, Hamilton Water stayed the same, other than the new leadership under Andrew. Environmental services, this change occurred last February, but this is the other change that happened just before Christmas, is that we divided the responsibilities and tasks in engineering services. So Gord is now looking after those front-end processes, and as Gary spends more time on the LRT project, we were trying to be humane with Gary with the workload. So those are the fundamental changes that occurred just before Christmas. So as a reminder, there is a small financial benefit from this restructuring, but we won't enjoy that until 2019. So again, the changes that we've made, this is the organizational design criteria that was developed with Core International over probably a couple of years. I can tell you I spent a lot of late nights with Core in the fall of 2016 developing this criteria, and I hope that it's obvious to people when you read this criteria and then you look at our org structure that it all aligns with it. And really what we're seeing is we're seeing kind of a slimming of the senior positions in Public Works. At the end of this year, we will have eliminated 3 director positions over the last year and a half, but we have increased some key strategic positions, some worker bees down in the organization. So we are a little slimmer at top, but I think we're set ourselves up well in order to meet the challenges that we have ahead of us. So just as another reminder as well that Hamilton Water is not part of this budget presentation today, but is obviously a key responsibility that Public Works has. When you look at the math here under the organizational chart, you'll see that we are increasing the complement as a result of the 3rd year, the 10-year strategy under transit, but we also did see the transportation planning group move over to planning and economic development. That was actually direction that was given to us by council a few years ago. So John, working with Jason throughout 2017, we identified what roles of transportation planning should move over to planning and ECDEV. So that's why the math may not quite add up there, is that the majority of this increase is as a result of the transit strategy, but we did lose, I think, 10 people over to planning and ECDEV as a result of that change. I included this slide here, and really, committee already knows this, but sometimes it's not bad to have a reminder, and I thought it was important for those folks who are viewing at home. Our budgets are complicated and they're big, and so this is the quantum that runs your Public Works Department. So as you remember that the operating rate capital and tax capital was approved last December, but this is what operates your Public Works Department from a total budget perspective. So I thought it would just be important to highlight that the total quantum that Public Works is in charge of is $969 million. That's what we have going forward for 2018. So as we step through this, when we look at the gross levy portion, it's $351 million. Whatever that $351 million, we do generate about $119 million worth of revenue, and I'm using the term revenue a little loosely there, but it is important to understand that when we do develop our budgets, there's about 120 lines of revenue, user fees, recoveries, grants, subsidies that feed the Public Works, the levy portion of the Public Works budget, which means we only have a $232 million impact on the levy as a whole. So when we think about the 120 revenue lines, it's everything from fare box revenue through transit, it's the transfer station revenue that we get from the transfer stations, it's fees and permit revenues that we pick up. So I guess the other part of the message here is that when we do those forecasts, we try to have a bit of caution in them. We don't want to be too aggressive with our forecast, but it does create a lot of complexity when we're building our budget, and I thought it was important to share that information. Just by way of a couple of examples of some of those revenue lines is the Blue Box program funding that we get from the province, formerly the WDO funding, and then our recycling revenues. We know that there is some risk with our recycling revenues going forward because of what's going on in China and their willingness to receive recyclable material from North America. So we know there's some risks there. So we do try to build some caution into these budgets, at the same time trying to balance that with Council's desire to keep our property tax low. Again, natural gas and diesel, I think this is really, this slide is really probably a compliment to Council and the commitment that they made. Going with natural gas in the transit network, I know a number of years ago, I wasn't part of the discussion, but I was sitting there listening to it, and I know the Council was a little bit apprehensive. Do you kind of switch back over to natural gas now after we got out of it over a number of decades ago? But I think this is one where that decision is really paying off. What you can see here is that the natural gas portion of our annual fuel charges is growing, but the diesel is declining dramatically. And then our overall budgets have been declining. There is a dramatic difference between the efficiency of a diesel bus versus a natural gas bus. I'm going to get Debbie or Mark to correct me here. I think it's 17 cents a kilometer is what a natural gas bus operates at, where a diesel operates at 53 cents a kilometer. So making bold changes like that, you can see the payoff that you've enjoyed over the last number of years because it's dramatically reduced our budgets. Here we are. It all rolls up to this. So there's a breakdown of the different divisions within Public Works. A couple of things that I'll just highlight here is this 10.6% savings here. That came out of the great work that in Gary's shop that Gordon McGuire and Mike Field and that team have done around the street lighting program. So we're enjoying a $750,000 reduction this year in our energy costs, and we're looking forward to seeing what that's going to be for 2019. And then the big other number that will jump out here is the 10.3% increase for transit. But again, I'll take you back to Transit Day. The big three drivers in transit are, and let me see if I'll talk about them in a minute, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to show if you took transit out of our budget, Public Works is at 0.9. And I think that's really a tremendous success and a compliment to the leadership team over there. But the other thing that I'd like to highlight is there's some of the key drivers, employee-related costs, the transit strategy. So year 3 of the 10-year strategy, annualized in 2018, is $2.1 million. DART's contract with the increased rides that we know we're going to have to be able to provide is $1.6 million. Winter control and maintenance, the only change that we've made to winter control this year is we're going with a 5-year average. It was 5 years ago that Council changed their level of service that they wanted us to provide to the community. So we know that using a 5-year average that encompasses that now is more reflective of reality. And even though we've had some positive variances in the last year or two, the look of the weather this year, I'm not so hopeful that that's going to happen this year. So there is a little bit of a pressure for winter control. The waste contracts, this is just for the renewal of the existing waste contracts into 2018 and 19. The Presto operating agreement, there was lots of discussion at committee about the Presto operating agreement, so that's going to produce a $350,000 pressure as well. And then, as I mentioned, the great work that Gordon and his team have done to drive that $750,000 savings. So I do just want to back up for 1 minute. There is one other number that I wanted to share with you. If you consider that this is really a service level enhancement in transit and is consistent with the continuing investments that the Council is making in transit, but that is an increased level of service because we're putting more service on the road. This is an increased level of service because we're putting more service on the road. And this is something that we really didn't have control of. So if you take those and put them aside and just talk in terms of the maintenance budget, if you take those three out, all of Public Works is at 1.6%. And I think that's a real tribute to the leadership team that's sitting here and the staff that are sitting in the gallery. And I just wanted to recognize them for that. I think that's quite an achievement. So there are 20 more slides that go into detail division by division. I wasn't going to walk through them. Mr. Chair, if it's your wish, we can certainly deal with those questions there. But that's the end of my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Dan, thank you very much for an extremely thorough presentation. You often referenced your leadership team, which I concur, but every leadership team needs a field general, and you have smoothly and seamlessly transitioned nicely into the general manager's role of Public Works, and I know I'm very proud of you, and I'm sure my colleagues are as well. Excellent job. Okay, And colleagues, because this is budget presentation, I'm going to allow questions, answers, commentary, all interspersed because there's no actual action items here today. All right, starting off with Councillor Brenda Brenda's out of the room at this time. We'll get her back on. So I go with Councillor Chad Collins, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted to thank Dan and his staff because there is a lot going on in terms of climate change, as you said, Dan and I, my beach residents, and I struggled last year through record lake levels, and you had some great pictures here that illustrated the damages that were caused as a result. And I know, Mr. Chairman, that we're actually undertaking a study right now that looks at what recommendations should come from climate change and rising lake levels. And the question, I think you raised it during your presentation, was, what is this the new norm? So lake levels last year were the highest in 100 years, but are we to anticipate that next year, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? And so a lot of changes will need to take place as a result of the changes that are coming, not just certainly on the lake and in the harbor, but we've seen that with our infrastructure in all areas of the city. So I just wanted to thank Dan and his staff because there are some unexpected files that have come up over the last year to 18 months. Certainly the escarpment was referenced, and all of these issues have created budget pressures and workload issues for staff. And so they've been quick to respond, especially Dave Alberton in water, wastewater. Dave was terrific with my constituents, and I just wanted to take this opportunity to thank you and your staff for responding so quickly to those people in our community who, when in a time of need, are looking for answers and are looking for assistance, and your staff have always been willing to do that. So I wanted to take this opportunity through the budget, as Dan highlighted it, to say thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Collins. Next on the speakers list, Ward 8 Councillor Terry Whitehead. Councillor Whitehead, let me activate you there, and you're activated.
Yeah, thank you. I raise this year in and year out, and I don't know, I haven't seen any proposals or suggestions. Very interesting slide, by the way, in respect to some of the pressures on the road systems moving forward in regards to poor and fair, and if we don't start putting more money into it, we're going to have a lower score on the quality of our road system. So there's a number of approaches to that, but part of that is the investments we're currently making, whether or not the investments we're making in a road network is in fact meeting our objective of life cycle for the particular roads that are being rebuilt in our community. So if you're putting good money after bad, then that's only going to exasperate the chart that you put up on the slide. So I really need to understand on the quality control of the construction that's taking place. What metrics, what review, what are we doing to determine that the money we are investing in rebuilding roads are in fact going to meet the objective and timelines of life cycle versus poor quality work that now exasperates the problem of closing that gap with a good road network.
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, I'll start, and then maybe I'll invite Gary to help me out here. But I can tell you that departmentally, we're developing the fundamental backbone of a quality management system. That's one of the priorities throughout 2018. And when you do that, you start to identify what are the metrics that we should be using to determine whether or not our vendors are giving us the kind of quality that they should. So vendor performance and all of those things. So I will tell you, departmentally, we're going to start to see what areas where we're doing it well and what areas where we're not, and start to develop metrics that will tell that story better. So that will inform us better about whether it's road construction or service delivery through our waste contracts or whatever it is. Specifically for the quality of the road work that's being done, I know we've had this conversation, and I'm going to see if I can invite Gary in to add to that.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair, over the last few years, we've done a number of different reviews on, first of all, were we looking at the right things in the field, and secondly, then were we specifying the right things, and thirdly, were we calling the right work at the right time for doing the right thing. We've also worked very closely with procurement to give us the tools to be able to address poor workmanship and issues that we had with various contractors that allowed us to remedy those things that we may not have had in the past. and with like Dan said, with the continuous improvement, we're continuing to model that. But I mean, we have a rigorous quality control. We now have a new quality control. Actually, a project manager. We've upgraded it from a supervisor in our construction group. He's a professional engineer now, so we're increasing the rigor on those. We've always had our quality control, all of the compaction results and results with regard to the materials and everything. So is all documented, and I assure you it's always thoroughly reviewed.
So I appreciate that steps have been taken, because I mean, clearly the experiences that I've observed in my own ward in regards to road construction is really heavy grabbing that issue and trying to figure out how we can improve on the current processes to ensure that what investments we're making are going to be getting value for the money in regards to the life cycle of the roads that we're rebuilding. And certainly my experience in a couple of cases is that's certainly not the case. And the other challenge would be the 2-year warranty period. We've had a chance to review that current policy, because often what transpires is a lot of this stuff reveals itself, in my certainly experiences, just beyond that 2-year period. So is there any review of that?
Ed?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the 2-year warranty period is typical for the industry. I know that we're actually dealing with a situation right now where the Consulting Engineers of Ontario thinks that we're putting too much onus on vendors when it comes to warranty and that kind of thing. So it's something we could look at. I can tell you in all my years of construction, it's a very standard requirement, especially when you consider that these facilities take a beating. So once you put them into service for 2 years, ultimately it would drive up your costs if you're going to make contractors on the hook for them for a longer period of time. That's going to get baked into their contract prices. So I don't think that we've got an active program right now to look at whether or not that's the right number, but I tell you it is standard across the industry.
Do we have any understanding at this point what percentage of our road rebuilds are probably subpar? Mr. Chair?
If I could, through you, Mr. Chair, if I could ask Gary to respond to that.
Question understood, Gary, or like the
Mr. Chair, no, I'm just not quite.
Councillor, explain a little.
Well, the
further,
question
please.
is of roads that are rebuilding. Do we have any data that would show us what percentage of new roads being built are actually subpar, not being to the standard that we would expect?
Gary?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, we have a full suite of tests and quality control that is standard in the industry and through the MTO. In fact, our rigor is probably greater than a lot of other municipalities, and that we have a higher level of standard in the asphalt that we have. That being said, there has been some other problems being incurred across the province with those types of things, although I can tell you that we haven't had that to anywhere near to the same extent that they've incurred that premature cracking in the pavement. We do have a full quality control system. As far as I know, we don't have any works in the past few years that we've had as what you would anticipate to be called substandard or underperforming in terms of the work going forward.
So two quick comments. One, I really appreciate the fact that we have taken steps on the quality control. I will continue, certainly in my own experience, monitor as much as I can and see how that lines up with what I'm hearing. But the fact that over the last some years you've taken those quality issues seriously and improved upon is really comforting. The other question, Mr. Chair, and maybe I see my time is over.
You're on a good theme of thought. Carry on, Councillor.
So the other side was that you create what's called standards for snow removal, right? Center Bear, all the different roads. And I understand, and I did have an opportunity, and I want to thank Mike Christian, went out at 7 a.m. And toured a number of roadways in the ward. I'm trying to understand whether or not we've been able to assess whether the standards that we've, as a council supported, are being met right across the board.
Dan?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I think I'm going to have to rely on Bob to see if he can help us out with that.
Manager Bob Paul or Acting Director Martin White or Manager Bob Paul of Winter Operations. Bob, you understood Councillor Whitehead's questioning in terms of level of service, please?
I'm sorry, through you, Deputy Mayor, I wonder if you could, Councillor, if you could just repeat
Just repeat it quickly,
So
Councillor
the question
Whitehead.
is, this council set a standard. We've realigned our districts. The standard is the same across the city for all road snow removing. I did a tour with Mike Christian yesterday, and there was a clear observation, even through the calls I'm getting. So and the reason I'm asking this question, because I got a follow-up. Are we meeting the standards that this council approved across all districts?
Through the Deputy Mayor, yes, and overall, through the districts, all 4 districts, we are meeting the level of service that has been established by council, if in particular to the residential roads, if that's what you're referring to.
Okay, so I will take it offline at this point. Certainly that's questionable. I can tell you that it was pretty clear through the litany of complaints I'm getting from people coming from one district into another, and it's like them indicating they're coming into a third world country. They're trying to understand why the service level in one area where they live is a much higher level than the level they're coming into. And then certainly I can tell you that we drove around and you can clearly see it. So I need to understand what is transpiring in respect to these service levels that, it's being applied equally across all districts. And that's not what it seems to be happening, but I'm going to have that conversation offline. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Councillor. I know you'll huddle with staff and have that kind of conversation. Thank you. Dan, was there a closing comment?
Yeah, if I may, Mr. Chair. So, I think we're getting back to the quality conversation. So the residential roads are done for the most part by our contracted staff. So I don't think we have the resources to check on every road after they're done. It sounds like we're having some issues around the contracted staff and how well they're doing it. So the fact that they've been up and down the street, that's one check mark, but they got to make sure they got the blade down and they're achieving the level of service. So clearly we've got some issues, but I would say I would categorize it in a quality metric that we need to get better at.
So hang on, Councillor Whitehead. Let me activate you to closing comment. Go ahead.
Just a dovetail. I mean, if you got a district that has one plow for every 30 kilometers, you have a district with one plow for every 15 kilometers, it begs a question, right? And I need to follow up on that. Thank you.
Fair enough. Thanks, Councillor. Next on the speakers list, Councillor Ferguson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't see any disparity between wards. I drive all over the place. I see it sometimes within a ward, but sometimes that's just the skill of the operator that's on that particular plow, particularly when it comes to courts. I'm quite pleased with the progress we've made with snow removal this year. It's been a tough year for snow. And my office gets some complaints, but not as many as you would expect with this type of snowfall we're seeing. So I want to congratulate Bob and his staff. I think you're up against a big year and a lot of problems. But through you, Mr. Chairman, to Dan. Dan, can you go to slide 55? When I was a kid, there used to be a TV show called $1 Million Man. I think it was Lee Majors.
$10 million man, wasn't it?
That was the woman, was $10 million. The man was $1 million. And now Dan is the $1 billion man. And, that's quite an interesting number. You have $1 billion under your control. I think it's $1.8 billion that we're spending. So I suspect, I was going to ask you what keeps you awake at night, but probably everything when you got $1 billion under your control. So thanks for putting that up. I thought it was an interesting display of what Public Works does in this community. And I know you get some revenue from selling water and other things, but you're overseeing $1 billion in sales. That's not to go unnoticed. If you go to slide 60. So you're saying excluding transit, you're at 0.9%? Is that correct? Am I reading that right?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that's correct.
Okay. Huh. That's and I can't tell you how nice it is on slide 61, if you go to that. First time ever I've ever seen a general manager stand up here and say, because of your investments in the street lighting, I'm putting up a $750,000 savings. Generally, those returns from investment in capital, that we hear all these great business plans of the payback we're going to get, we never see them, and I've complained about that over the years. But now we're seeing a $750,000 reduction in our budget as a result of the pickup on the conversion to LEDs, and it puts out a great quality light too. So that's a great move. I know we experienced the same thing with Hamilton Renewable Power, where somebody had the courage to take the methane gas and put it through an engine and generate electricity to sell on the grid, and take the waste heat and use that in the sewage treatment plant, which saves us about $2 million a year. So this is the second time I've seen this pop up, once with Hamilton Renewable Power, now here with street lighting. So that's great to see. Now, if you just go back again to slide 60, when you say the 0.9%, does that include the spike in transit and the spike in darts?
Well, that's through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. That excludes transit.
I understand, but does it also exclude darts?
Yes.
Okay. In darts, we've seen a pretty significant jump in again this year. Any comment on darts? And it seemed to just sort of quietly go past. It's been a subject of significant debate in past years. But are you satisfied now? Have you got a year in the chair that the new program we put in place in darts is going satisfactorily? We don't see any stats on trips, what's happened year over year, how these single wheelchair vehicles are working out. I know it's a separate board that manages that, but it's under your budget that we see this. Are you satisfied now with the way budget or darts is operating?
Dan?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I would say so. Generally speaking, it is an unusual relationship that we have with darts. Certainly, from my experience, the way that we normally get contractors to work for us through a competitive process, and then the controls that we can have on that. But the accessible transit it's an unusual business anyway, and so the fact that AODA compels us to do a planning in a way that we can't plan to deny people trips. So when we do the calculation, we figure out the growth. We have to do all that. That's where we end up with the pressures that we're seeing, because the use of darts is just growing. Some of those logistical issues that have occurred over the last year around, are the buses too small? Should we keep a few of the R-Box? Those are kind of wrinkles that are, there's no kind of equation on how to fix that. We're just going to have to keep sorting our way through that. But I would say, generally speaking, from where I think we were a year ago to where we are now, I think we're in a better place.
So the $6,204,000 in transit spike, does that include the $1,680,000 for darts?
There's the line by line right there. That's the third year, the 10-year transit strategy. That's darts right there. So that is the increased ridership that we expect in darts.
Okay, go back to page 60 again then. So the transit increase of 10.3% or $6.2 million, does that include darts?
Yes. Through you, Mr. Chair. So that 10.3% right there, that includes darts. It includes the third year of the transit strategy. It includes the increase from Presto. That's all baked in. Yeah.
Okay, so quick question to Mike. Mike, I know that we area rate transit, and so does that mean that the extra $6.2 million, apart from the charge outs you have to people on this side of the table, the suburban municipalities, on a per kilometer basis for the transit we have, that $6.2 million would be divided primarily between wards 1 through 8?
General Manager?
So through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, the conventional transit is area rated. The accessible transit is not area rated. So with respect to the year 3 of the transit strategy, subject to where those kilometers are distributed in terms of additional service, that impact would be area rated. If those kilometers are focused principally in the former city of Hamilton or on existing lines, then the impact would be aligned to those wards. So again, if it's focused principally on former city of Hamilton, it would be wards 1 through 8 that would be impacted.
Okay, so the impact then to suburban municipalities for public works then is Well, it's not 0.9 because you have to deduct the 1.6 for darts, which I think is spread across the entire city. And I get the little bit of mileage that are kilometers that we have in the suburban municipalities would impact it too. But most of that, if you take off 6.2, subtract the 1.6, so most of that $4.5 million would be dispersed between wards 1 through 8. Is that correct?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, that's correct. I believe there were some. I believe some of the routes do extend out to the suburban areas that the additional investments would be made to, and specific to Ancaster, I believe, in terms of Meadowlands. So there would be some kilometers and therefore some impact to the suburban areas as well.
Okay. And I don't know whether you or Debbie, you did mention there was going to be, through you, Mr. Chairman, an enhancement, and I missed the transit day. I had a medical procedure that day, so I couldn't.
Understood, Councillor.
But
good time
Debbie,
for your questions.
The extra route into the Meadowlands that you've identified, will you be able to tell me shortly offline what that impact is to Ancaster?
Director?
Through you, Deputy Mayor, yes, to the Delaware service, I can have that conversation with you offline when we have that calculation.
Okay, that's all my questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Ferguson. Next on my speakers list, Councillor Pearson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor and Dan. Excellent presentation. I will certainly reiterate that. And a lot of, I like the way you put together a lot of sort of overview of everything that Public Works handles, especially you mentioning and showing the picture of the turtle that's in the Red Hill Valley, and there's 2 other projects going forward right now. I think the Bear and the Nest. So these were all agreements that were done when the Red Hill Valley project was moving forward with the Haudenosaunee community, etc. So excellent presentation. I just want to mention a couple things. I know Councillor Whitehead touched on the asset management program, roads program. So my question through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, maybe to Gary would be, how are we doing with the asset management program where we just go in and do the shave and paves? Because I'm finding, I know with the road, I've asked for surfacing this year for Barton Street from Grays to Green. We thought it would just be, we were trying to say, I think I've been told that we can't do a cold in place. It has to be a full lift and replacement. So I'm just concerned because, yes, the roads are breaking down a lot faster than we can get to them. So how are we doing on the asset management part of it in the residential neighborhoods?
How are we doing on that program, Director Moore?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we usually have about $8.5 million dedicated to that portion of the what we call the asset renewal or asset preservation program in the neighborhoods. The ones that we have identified as being that type of correct for that type of road where it is in its pavement degradation is we continue to identify those and monitor the projects that we do on those roads to make sure we're doing the right thing at the right time. As the roads continue to degrade, they get to a steeper part of the curve and they start to go a lot quicker. So we do have to try and get to those ones. I mean, they might have been appropriate this year, but we couldn't get to them because we couldn't get the sewers lined or there was some water main work ahead of it. And by the time we got to it, the road was so far gone because of, like Dan said, the bad winters seem to be showing themselves in those roads now. There's a couple have fallen apart that we thought, they would last for a few more years. So it's a continual process that we always have to, look at what we've done, go back and look what we did, whether it's still appropriate, whether it's appropriate for the next, and to continue to do those assessments on the roads.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think I certainly appreciate the update and how it's working because it's also important for the residents to understand because it's hard to explain to them out there that, it's on the cusp a lot of times and once it gets past that point, now it goes into a different review process. If I'm correct, Mr. Deputy Mayor, through you to Gary, is that what you're trying to say, telling us, right?
Gary?
Mr. Chair, that's exactly correct.
Excellent. Thank you, and I appreciate that. So while I'm still on roads, and it's not Gary, I do know, I want to thank staff. Over the last number of years, I've had so many sidewalk deficiencies in Ward 10, sidewalks, curbs, driveway aprons, And I tell you, it's been refreshing over the last year or so. I've had Brian Hughes and Robert Marcus that have been doing a terrific job of catching up and addressing a lot of the deficiencies. When you've got assets and sidewalks that are over 30, 35, 40 years old, you start seeing how fast they break down. So I want to put that out there, that they're doing a tremendous job in getting at least the ones in Ward 10, and I know I'm on top of calling them all the time and saying, or emailing and letting them know exactly where there are ones when I'm out in the ward. With regards to snow clearing, I'm going to be honest, I brought a file in here because I was going to review it this morning while we were going through, and I thought it was my sidewalk file, but it's not. It's my snow clearing file. You know, I've only received about two dozen complaints this year. So I know our staff are doing a tremendous job, and when I do get the complaints, staff at Roads East are great. The only comment I have to make, and I've said in the past, is we're still getting a grader servicing a good chunk of Ward 10. And that is an issue with residents because they can't, a grader cannot get in as close as the snow plows and does not do as good a job. So I'm just going to put that out there, but the roads are getting cleared. What else was I going to say? Lastly, I just want to mention in forestry, because we've had such an issue for so many years now with the emerald ash borer. And I just want to be sure, because I've just had, certainly interested in the environment and our trees, because Ward 10 had the largest number of ash trees in the city boulevards, 19.6% of them, of the city trees. So I just wanted to be sure we have another infestation that is a fungus actually coming in, and it will be affecting our oak trees. Are staff aware of that?
Really?
It's called oak wilt. It's hit Michigan, and it hasn't hit Canada yet, but it's at the border.
That's
and it's a very major fungus that travels very fast.
Thanks for the alert, Councillor. Director Murdoch?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, yes, staff are aware of it, and we are monitoring the oaks to see if it has hit Hamilton or has arrived in Canada.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I wanted to be sure it was on the radar, because I'm not sure if there's any, at this point, I don't think there's anything that can stop it. So I just want to be sure, because we don't have oak in our city boulevards usually, but there'll be a number of them in our city parks and open spaces that could present a problem. So thank you very, very much again. I just wanted to put those comments out there, and tremendous job, Dan, and to all the team, and everyone behind the team, because there's a lot of people out there. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Pearson. And Councillor Brenda Johnson, you were recognized first, but I knew you had to step out of the chamber to take a call. Councillor Johnson, you're on.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thanks for the presentation, Dan, and introducing your senior staff and all those that are in the gallery today. But hinging on to what Councillor Pearson said, your frontline workers are amazing, from roads to horticultural, right across the gamut. I see Emil's here from the waste management for the landfill. That's not an easy file, especially when you're trying to appease all the residents that back on or front on to that landfill. It's a busy place, and they are on top of it. The neighbors are absolutely satisfied with the work that they're doing there. Also, I just want to put a shout out to Andrew and Nick from Hamilton Water. They came out with their full complement of the staff. I know this is not the water budget, but I just wanted to shout out for them. And this was regarding the odors that were coming from the airport due to the glyco releasing. And Councillor Ferguson, as the chair of Public Works, was there. Councillor Skelly was there. There's been a lot of work done in that area. There seems to be, from hearing from the residents that night, there seems to be that there's going to be a lot more coming. And a lot more that need to be done. But I really, really appreciate the fact that they were willing to come out and listen to the residents and act on some of those complaints. You said in your, and I'm not going to make you go back to that slide because it was number 26, you said about the life cycle replacement. We have a parkette that was built less than 6 years ago at the end of 50 Road. It's called Windows to the Lake. We had a major weather event. There was a rusty culvert underneath this parkette, wiped out the parkette. It was built in the millions of dollars, and yet every year we keep asking, when does it get replaced? The community has been using it. It was a very well used, visited spot. So we're still not seeing any replacement coming forward. So when I see about the life cycle replacement, I see about, when you're budgeting in your house, you always put some money aside, should put some money aside to replace that roof after 20 years. And yet this was such an unexpected expense when you think about it. This thing was built 6 years ago. It should have lasted for the next 20, 30 years, and it got wiped out in less than 6. So have we got plans for things like, and I saw you put on slide 26 about the trail, and that's really important too, but we still have other projects now that have just now been put on your back because it wasn't expected. Do you have any sort of insight for this?
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I think the only thing that I could say is we don't have a dedicated reserve for that specific purpose, but we do have reserves that we can access when we run into these situations. But there isn't one, I would say it's not in the way that you described it. They're not for that purpose. But certainly at Council's direction, we can access those reserves to undertake repairs. So.
Well, if I need to ask for direction for staff at this point, I would love to do that because this is something now that it was wiped out. I'm going to guess here because my memory is starting to fail me. At least over a year ago, this parquet has become a safety issue. They've had to literally remove most of it because it would actually be a safety issue for anyone to visit this spot now because then they would be dropping down 10, 20 feet into Lake Ontario. So if I need to ask direction for staff to come back with a feasibility report on getting this parquet replaced, this brand new parquet replaced in a much more safe and a much more stable project, that would be wonderful. I will do that. And also, the other thing that it creates an added pressure, especially to our horticultural. Marcia is just amazing, and with the staff that she has and the amount of medians and the roundabouts and gateways that she has to take care of, every year we have planning approvals that come in. Developers love to create these gateways. They love to create these mediums. They love to create these wonderful little roundabouts. And then when they sign off and the city assumes them, Marcia's budget now gets stretched beyond thin because she only has so much to do this many projects. We've just added another 10, especially in the built-up areas like Bimbrook and Mount Hope and Winona. So now, is there a way, and I've introduced this before, and I believe they're doing it in Halton, that when a developer comes in with a gateway, comes in with a medium to sell their pretty little houses, that they have to put some money into an endowment account that goes towards maintaining those added features, and it helps out the horticultural department to continue on keeping them nice and pretty. So have we even looked at something like that?
Dan, I thought we had, but through you, Dan, please.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So you're talking about the operating impacts from growth, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
And to be candid, we don't have a good process for that right now. The capital detail sheets that we put forward as a department or internally, they always identify the operating impacts. That's one of the areas of focus that I want to work with Jason on throughout 2018 is how do we get better at identifying and capturing the operating impacts from growth. So whether it's 3 new streetlights, whether it's another kilometer of road to plow. There's a variety of tasks that aren't being captured that come as a result of growth that we're not capturing in a meaningful way right now. So that's, I guess the answer is it's on our radar. Hopefully we can make some progress on that in 2018.
And thank you. And just anecdotally, Deputy Mayor, we had a beautiful gateway that was maintained by the developer until the city had to assume it over after a certain amount of time. And then it just became a reactive. So a lot of the bushes were ripped up. A lot of the bushes were taken out because it would just mean constant maintenance on this. I know of irrigation systems that were ripped up. So this was something that if we're asking the developers or the developers want to put these things in to make their development look a lot nicer, then shouldn't we be asking them to put aside some money to continue that maintenance program? And I believe that Halton does do that, so I'd really appreciate it if you could look into that. It's just frustrating when we're getting calls coming into the office like the roundabout looks like crap again, and it's full of weeds, and there's got to be something in place that would help alleviate the operational end of this and continue to keep these communities looking vibrant and beautiful. But I really believe that if this is something that the developers or the applicants that come in for their development want to do, then I really believe that we should be putting some of the onus on them if we want to keep maintaining them. So I hope those two directions are all I need to do through my preambles, but you can guide me
Can I offer,
further.
Councillor Brendan Johnson, first of all, Dan, please check back on the records to your predecessors. I thought a good 5, 6, 7 years ago, your predecessors had recognized this exact issue with growth and were at least within budgets preparing and projecting impacts on operating budget so that even if it wasn't from the developer internally, you were preparing for that down the road. So could I get clarification on that, Dan, or is that something you just need to check again?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there are aspects where we've gotten pretty good at that, but I would say globally we're not good at it. It's got some work to do.
All right. And site-specific, Councillor Brendan Johnson, site-specific, can I humbly suggest, Councillor, you, Dan, and Manager Bunn for that Bimbrook Parquet, can I humbly suggest you folks huddle, and then if you need to bring something forward in the near future, bring it to this body.
And this is the 50 Road Parquet in Winona.
Fair enough. Is that okay, Councillor,
No, that's wonderful. And one last comment about the snow removal. 9 times out of 10, the complaints that we're getting in, it comes down to that there are so many cars parked on the road that the plow, whether we have a tiny little Bobcat or we have a snow plow, they simply can't do the roads because people are choosing to park their cars on the road during a winter event. So I really want to put that out there to everyone. Get the cars off the road, please, so we can do our jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Next on my speakers list, first time, Mayor Eisenberger.
Thank you, and thank you to Dan and staff and everyone that's up there for the improved. Every year we get an improved, I think, reporting mechanism and much more granular data. I think that's really impressive. So thank you for that continuing work. Certainly helps not only us around the horseshoe here, but the folks at home understand the breadth of work that needs to happen in public works, which is massive. I don't think it's too big. I think it's very manageable, but it's still a lot of intricate work that needs to happen in our community. That's so vital to how we continue to make our city work and progress and prosper. So thank you for all that great work. I just have a question because I happened to be on a stretch of road the other day that is just horrendous, and that is Main West from in and around McMaster all the way to Dundurn. It's got to be the worst stretch of road I can possibly imagine. And I'd heard that we were holding off doing anything there until LRT, which is quite a ways off. And so it is a roller coaster there. And I know there's been patches that's been attempted there that it's spread out all over the place, not working particularly well. Tough time to do that. So can I get a sense of what our plan is for that stretch? Because it really is bad. I can't imagine we're going to leave it like that for 4 or 5 years, potentially. So is there any kind of effort to do a shave and pave or something to at least hold us over on the short run?
Dan?
You, Mr. Deputy Mayor, there is no plan at the moment, but I think based on our observations this winter and your comments, I think we're going to have to bring back some kind of a report to look at what could we do to get us between here and LRT. The difficulty we have is I characterize it as a lot of throwaway money, but we got to get from here to there without experiencing what we're experiencing now. So I think I'm happy to bring back a report to identify the costs and what the tactic would be.
Yeah, I think it's worthy. In the summertime when the road wasn't as bad as it is today, but is still bad, I know one of the GO bus drivers said the worst stretch of road that he experienced from Toronto to Hamilton is that stretch along Main Street going east. It is, and now it's particularly bad. So I just can't imagine that we're going to leave it in that state for, potentially 4 or 5 years. I think it's rough. So my only request is to have a serious look at that, because, and if for those that want to try and sample, I'm pretty forgiving when it comes to potholes. I understand why we have them, and I know that we've got our crews out there working, feverishly to get them filled in as quickly as we can. But this one is a corrugated road at this point, and it's quite bad. So I would say let's have some attention to that, sooner rather than later. Wintertime, now's not the opportune time. Patches aren't working, but certainly over the summertime we have to have a serious look at what we can do there in the short term. So I appreciate that. Beyond that, thank you, staff and all, and the entire Public Works team. You keep our city moving and going, and this report and the way it's been reported in recent years is really quite informative, quite granular, and I think very helpful in terms of us understanding where we are and where we need to go. So thank you.
Much appreciated for your comments, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Whitehead, second time. I was going to put myself first time, but if you'd like to go second time. Okay, hang on. Let me activate you. Councillor Whitehead, second time.
Yeah, so I did try to move a motion on snow removal to facilitate our snow plows by whenever there's a snow event that we would prohibit parking on, whatever roadways. So I don't know what happened with that, but the biggest complaint I get from my residents is why don't we do that? The second point is that we got 6,600 kilometers of roadway in our ward, or in the city. It's great to advocate and champion a particular road that's bad. I think there's 15 councillors that will be advocating on a constant basis of roads in their areas that are bad, and it becomes a competitive issue, as you identified, with very little dollars. And so what's really important is to make sure we're not spending good money after bad. And so if you're going to look for a quick fix, knowing full well that that's going to be completely needs to be reconstructed at some point in time, there could be an argument based on other roads that the Shave and Pay, for example, would actually benefit and extend the life. Those value sets, I think it is already implying, needs to be considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead. Now, previous Deputy Mayor, Councillor Ian Johnson, if you would please press request so that you could take the chair for a moment, and I will activate you.
Please go ahead, Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dan, just a few questions. Quickly back to slide 29, please, Dan. And I've just got 4 slides or so that I just want to ask a couple of questions on. Mr. Chairman, through you to either the General Manager or the City Manager. So a concern of mine is, in my humble opinion, Mr. Chairman, no computer will ever replace the human intelligence that comes with experience. So I guess my question, Mr. Chairman, through you to Dan, because you're alarming me, Dan, with your forewarning about a lot of the brains that may be leaving your department too quickly, too often in the next few years, if I heard you correctly. And I've always put this plea out to senior leadership team that if people want to stay longer and they're of still continued value to this corporation and ultimately the taxpayers, Mr. Chairman, I would humbly submit that we do our best to keep them around. So my question in that preamble, Mr. Chairman, through to either Dan or the City Manager, are these people that simply have indicated to you, Dan, they are nearing their time, they'd like to go to get on with their retirement life or the new chapter of their lives? Or is this one, for whatever reason, because of renewal and greater newness, we're kind of nudging and suggesting that, you know what, maybe your time, sir, madam, is up? And so, Mr. Chairman, through you to Dan and the City Manager, I'd like to get, obviously, no identifiable individuals. I'd like to just get some kind of a handle on why this number of people may be going in the next few years, Mr. Chairman, through you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll start. I think from my experience, certainly in Public Works, these people are ready to go. They're not being nudged out the door. I think they know and understand the appreciation we have for their expertise and their long history. So I don't think that's an issue at all. I think these are very personal decisions that people make, and I think they're, from my experience anyway, I think they're ready to go. They want to go. So.
Okay. Fair enough, Dan. I'll accept that. And because the City Manager, yes, City Manager, Mr. Chairman, through you to the City Manager.
Just a little bit more through the Chairman. Just as you know, we've updated and advanced our whole performance approval system. So one of the things that we ask people is about the short, medium, long-term career plan. So we get a heads up from people, generally speaking, as to when is likely they're going to retire. Dan's not taking any credit, and he should be taking credit for the succession planning that started in water, wastewater, and now is extending certainly across the department. That same succession planning is occurring across the entire organization. And so the fact that, and you heard it from a number of the other GMs, I mean, they're bringing people into this chamber to, get an experience about working with you and working with senior staff. So there's a lot of things that are happening to kind of, to make sure that the next the next leaders ready to go. And yes, we are, as you know, there's a few staff right now that, and I think I can mention them, but I mean that have assignments that are helping this organization as they transition out. So we never want to lose the experience. I mean, there's some individuals that you know are just so valuable to us. So I think the way we're approaching it is right. But as much as I know what Dan is talking about, I mean, we've been predicting this for some time. We have 4 generations of people that work for the city of Hamilton. So which is a pretty wide cross-section of different groups. And so we've got a pretty good handle on who's ready to retire, and we have strategies for replacing them.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, City Manager and Dan, for raising my comfort level and for that reassurance. Slide 30, Dan, please, Mr. Chairman. So Dan, to you and to Director Moore primarily, and to Director Matthews-Malone under operations, and I say this extremely respectfully, and you know we've kind of elevated the debate on extreme weather and climate change, Mr. Chairman, I'd say probably over the last 2 or 3 budget cycles. And again, not to belabor the point, Mr. Chairman, but I think in terms of increased amount of resources and awareness, quite frankly, and I'll stand to be corrected if staff have a different feeling, which I'm open to, came more from the community and the political level at the standing committee table to strongly encourage staff to say to spend more time investigating point 2 up there, extreme weather and climate change, because of the number of shutdowns, of accesses that were occurring more often. So, Mr. Chairman, through to Dan, I guess, Dan, my point is you've got such intelligence across your leadership team, and I respect them extremely much. I'm just wondering, were we a little slow to recognize the climate change and the extreme climate change that was occurring? Because it seems to me the last 3-4 years we've been extremely reactive. A lot of it, pardon the self-promotion in terms of at the Public Works table, on behalf of community, strongly directing and instructing staff to come back with plans and surveys of what we're going to do to maintain the accesses more regularly, more often, even to the point where I think politically driven your new budget is now 3 times the $300,000 annually you had for the 17 passes across the city. Now it's about $1 million, which I congratulate you. So my long-winded preamble, Mr. Chairman, through to Dan, looking back, is this something, looking at the Clairбот that was shut for 4 or 5 years, is it something looking back that maybe if we had devoted another division or some staff looking into it, maybe we could have been more proactive in terms of getting ahead of what's been occurring out there, Mr. Chairman? Through you to Dan.
Through you, Mr. Chair. I think what you're describing is just the balance that we always have to try to strike whenever we're dealing with any of our infrastructure is when does it need attention and when do you need to act on it. So with the, specifically with the escarpment faces, we did have proactive inspection and maintenance that was occurring. I do think we were victimized a little bit because we just had, coincidentally, had 2 or 3 events all kind of happen at the same time. So I don't think your observations aren't, I understand why you have the observations you do, but I think that's, you're really just articulating the balance that we're always trying to strike with, whether it's the escarpment faces or the shoreline or our roads and our pipes. We're always trying to find that right balance of inspection and, and not kind of pulling the alarm bell either at the same time. We're trying to manage that, right? So.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. And obviously now I think we're moving together, staff and council, on behalf of community, recognizing now this is a higher priority, and I think tangibly we're recognizing that. Mr. Chairman, through to Dan for another comment.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So specifically with the escarpment, I think one of the things that maybe we could do a better job is just helping with people's expectations. It's difficult to predict what's going to happen along the escarpment face. And I know I did hear comments where people, sometimes they think that maybe sometimes we know more than we know. I mean, there's only so much that you can anticipate with a natural feature like that. So I think that was kind of layered on top as well, that sometimes it doesn't give you much of a heads up that it's going to behave in a certain way. So I think that's one of the unique things about the escarpment face.
Okay, Dan. Quickly to slide 34, please, Dan. Mr. Chairman, you and your leadership team, primarily Director Moore, know that I've been a big supporter, both trying to support additional funding for the roads repairs and reconstruction budget item, as well as I've been a big backer of the asset management program. So clarify for me, Dan, I thought in the last few years you had said, was it the previous slide, that you said we're only doing $25.5 million a year. Am I mistaken? I thought I recall the last few budgets seeing roughly a $48 to $50 million number. Mr. Chairman, through you to Dan, to clarify.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So that's why I wanted to make sure that I articulated that. When we talk about kind of asset management, life cycle theory, the specific road work that we do in support of that asset management, extending the life of those assets, that only encompasses part of the entire, what you would call the roads capital budget envelope. And I think maybe that's something we can do a better job of. Within that $48 or $55 million, there's a bunch of other things that we're doing that is not life cycle replacement. The portion that's life cycle replacement is typically between $25 and $28 million. So that's one of the things that I think through the capital budget process next year we want to maybe highlight a little more, or maybe differently, so that it becomes clear that that entire quantum that's being spent within the road allowance, it's traffic lights, it's crossovers, it's islands that never existed before. It's a bunch of other capital investments that don't meet the definition of life cycle renewal, and it's the life cycle renewal that really drives this conversation.
So Dan, thank you for clarifying, Mr. Chairman. So is that internal within your departmental review team when you meet for budgets? If a block funding, which I recall and you've confirmed, of 48 to 50 million per year the last few years has been approved by council, with that amount of block funding, knowing what you're trying to convey the message here on this slide, would your departmental team not say that instead of 25.5 million just for the roads life cycle, and another 25 million for the sake of argument being put towards road allowance, corridor management, LED lighting, installation, traffic lights, etc. Do you internally go, hold it folks, to get to that 62 mark we want to maintain, we'll take 10 million from the street lighting and we're going to add that to the 25.5 to the life cycle. Can you help me understand the discussion that occurs within the department, Mr. Chairman? Through you to Dan.
That's through you, Mr. Chair. That's one of those processes that I think we need to look at to talk and to refine, so that we can talk about priorities there. I think currently, right now, there's kind of we have a practice. We display that information, but I don't know that it's clear. And so that's one of the things that we want to refine, is to make sure that it's clear the decisions that the committee's making.
Okay, fair enough, Dan. Obviously, you're ahead of that as usual, but I appreciate the fact you've confirmed that. And lastly, Dan, to slide 60. Your budget, your final budget number, obviously a very prudent number overall, obviously extremely favorable if you take away the transit strategy. But, I've committed this year, I think council by overwhelming majority, if not unanimously, has committed to renewing the third year of the transit strategy. My hope and prayer would be, as we're continuing to invest even more in transit, I really, really hope that ridership levels will increase in our city for conventional public transit. I know there's a multitude of factors: clean buses, better running times, more buses, more operators being hired. But I'm really hopeful that in future years with continued investment, the director won't, whoever's here next year or next term, the director hopefully won't be bringing forward another 400,000 rides down, and instead hopefully the marker will go in the other direction. Mr. Chairman, through you to Dan for a comment.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, there's a lot of things that go into ridership. We will certainly be in a much better position by this time next year to have a lot more data available to us. The automated passenger counters and some of the other investments that we're making around data is going to be able to help us have a clearer picture on really what's going on. Ridership can be determined by a variety of different things, and I mentioned earlier in my presentation that I can see gasoline is starting to rise in price. Sometimes that drives more people to the bus. But we are hopeful and optimistic that this work that Jason and his team are going to do around rationalizing the routes and being able to provide a higher level of service through that process, that'll hopefully drive up ridership as well.
And, Mr. Chairman, your current 3.4, which includes the enhanced transit funding, that's part of where do we sit, City Manager, or Dan, where do we sit citywide right now, or General Manager Zagarek? Are we around the 2.5, 2.8, which would include, I just want to get a handle, which would include this 3.4? Mr. Chairman, through you.
So through the chair, currently corporate-wide, we are at 2.3%, and that would represent about $77 for an average household.
And that includes the 3.4, Mike?
So through the chair, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. And lastly, Dan, darts. I think there's enough interest still around this table and some issues, small van, the traditional bus. I just don't want to every year seem to have to beg for darts to come in so that we can see the faces. And I know they've got their own board of directors, but we provide the funding. So any opportunity before this budget's over, Mr. Chairman, through you to Dan, that we can see some darts representatives with our own staff and then we can have some Q&As for them?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. I believe our transit staff have requested through the board for them to make a delegation.
Terrific. Hopefully that'll be done before the budget cycle's over. Chairman Eden Johnson, thank you. I'll take the chair back now. Thank you. I see no other questioners or comments. So can I have a motion to receive the Public Works budget? Councillor Skelly, Councillor Collins. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Any other notices of motion or new business? Councillor Marula, you were quick to move an adjournment, seconded by Councillor Pearson. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried. Folks, be safe over this weekend with another pending storm tonight. Thank you, Stephanie, always. Thank you.